The courtroom buzzed with the usual murmurs of anticipation as Judge Eleanor Grayson adjusted her glasses and scanned the room. Known for her sharp tongue and even sharper sense of justice, she had earned a reputation that commanded respect, or at least fear, from everyone who entered her courtroom. Today's docket was packed with minor cases, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. That is, until the doors swung open with an audible creak. A tall figure strode in, his presence immediately drawing all eyes. He wore an ornate Royal Guard uniform, complete with polished boots, golden insignias, and a gleaming helmet adorned with a crimson plume. The man moved with confidence, but his timing was far from ideal. Judge Grayson frowned deeply as he approached the defendant's table, disrupting the flow of the proceedings. Her gavel hovered threateningly above its block. "Your Honor," the bailiff whispered nervously, leaning toward her bench, "that's Captain Marcus Alden of the Royal Guard." She raised an eyebrow but didn't soften her expression. "Does being part of the Royal Guard exempt him from basic courtesy? Tell him to remove his helmet or leave." The bailiff relayed the message, but instead of complying, Captain Alden stood firm. His voice carried across the room, calm yet unyielding. "I'm here under protest, Your Honor. This charge is frivolous, and my position demands respect for protocol." Judge Grayson leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "Respect for protocol," she echoed, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "Perhaps you should have considered courtroom protocol before waltzing in late and refusing to follow the rules like everyone else." The spectators exchanged glances, some whispering behind their hands while others watched intently, sensing the tension building between two figures of authority. For a moment, it felt less like a trial and more like a clash of titans, one representing the law, the other embodying tradition and power. Captain Alden didn't budge. If anything, his stance grew firmer. "Your Honor," he said evenly, though there was a subtle edge to his words, "my duties require me to remain in full uniform at all times, including during public appearances such as this. To remove my helmet would be disrespectful to the office I represent." The judge wasn't convinced. She slammed her gavel down once, twice, 3 times, silencing the growing murmurs in the gallery. Her patience had worn thin. "This isn't about your helmet," she snapped. "It's about showing respect for the court. You're not above the law, Captain Alden, no matter how shiny your buttons are." For a brief second, something flickered in Alden's eyes. Was it annoyance? Amusement? It was hard to tell beneath the shadow of his helmet. But whatever it was, it only fueled Judge Grayson's irritation further. When he still refused to comply, she made her decision. "That's enough," she declared, rising slightly from her seat. "You've shown nothing but contempt for this court. Bailiff, escort him out. We'll reconvene when the defendant decides to take this seriously." The room erupted into hushed gasps as the bailiff hesitated, clearly uneasy about laying hands on a member of the Royal Guard. But Judge Grayson's glare left no room for argument. Slowly, reluctantly, the bailiff gestured for Alden to step aside. With one last measured look at the judge, Alden turned and walked out, his footsteps echoing ominously in the now silent courtroom. As the doors closed behind him, Judge Grayson sat back down, feeling a mix of triumph and unease. She'd done what she believed was right, but deep down, she couldn't shake the feeling that she might have underestimated the man in the uniform. Little did she know, this was only the beginning of a much bigger story. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Judge Eleanor Grayson leaned back in her chair, rubbing her temples. The confrontation with Captain Marcus Alden had been intense, but she told herself it was necessary. Rules were rules, and if someone as prominent as a royal guard could flout them without consequence, what message would that send? Still, something about the encounter lingered in her mind, gnawing at her thoughts like an unanswered question. She picked up the case file again, flipping through its pages with deliberate care. At first glance, the charge seemed straightforward enough. A minor traffic violation involving a diplomatic vehicle. Hardly the kind of offense that warranted such drama or defiance. But as she read further, details began to emerge that made her pause. According to the report, the alleged infraction occurred near a restricted government zone, and witnesses claimed the car had sped past security checkpoints without stopping. Suspicious, yes, but not necessarily criminal. Then came the section on the defendant, Captain Marcus Alden. His name alone carried weight. A quick scan revealed more than just his title as a royal guard. He wasn't merely a soldier in fancy armor. He was also a highly trained legal expert who advised the monarchy on constitutional matters. The file mentioned his involvement in drafting reforms to strengthen transparency within the royal administration. It even included references to lectures he'd given at prestigious law schools, where he spoke passionately about justice and accountability. Judge Grayson's stomach tightened. She realized now why Alden had seemed so composed during their exchange. His confidence wasn't arrogance, it was competence. And she had dismissed him without giving him a chance to explain himself. Worse still, she hadn't considered the possibility that this whole situation might be more complicated than it appeared. Her unease deepened when she stumbled upon a handwritten note tucked into the file. It was from one of her clerks, warning her discreetly that the charges against Alden had raised eyebrows among senior officials. Sources suggest foul play. The note read, "Proceed with caution." Foul play? What did that mean? Was this some sort of setup? Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the implications. If Alden was innocent, and worse, if he was being targeted for ulterior motives, then her decision to kick him out of court might have played right into someone else's hands. The thought sent a chill down her spine. Just then, the door to her chambers opened, and her assistant entered, holding a stack of papers. "Your Honor," the young woman said hesitantly, There's something you should know about Captain Alden." Grayson gestured for her to continue, her expression unreadable. "He's already filed a formal complaint about how today's proceedings were handled," the assistant explained. "But that's not all. Apparently, he's been investigating corruption allegations involving members of the judiciary, including people connected to this courthouse." The judge felt her blood run cold. Corruption. In her own system. She had always prided herself on maintaining integrity, but hearing this shook her to her core. Could it be true? Was Alden really trying to expose wrongdoing, only to be silenced by trumped-up charges? Before she could process everything, another knock sounded at the door. This time, it was the bailiff, looking unusually nervous. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "Captain Alden is here. He says he wants to discuss the case before it goes any further." Grayson hesitated. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain her authority and avoid appearing weak. But another part knew she couldn't ignore this. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than both of them. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "Show him in." Moments later, Captain Alden entered the room, his helmet now removed, revealing a face that was both stern and striking. His piercing gaze locked onto hers, and for the first time, Grayson saw vulnerability beneath the layers of discipline and pride. He didn't speak right away, letting the silence stretch between them. A calculated move, no doubt. Finally, he broke it. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady but tinged with frustration. "I understand your position, but I hope you'll allow me to clarify mine. This isn't just about a traffic ticket. It's about protecting the principles we both swore to uphold." Grayson stared at him, her earlier certainty crumbling. She had started the day thinking she was defending the sanctity of the court. Now she wondered if she had done the exact opposite. By the time Captain Marcus Alden returned to the courthouse, word of his abrupt dismissal had spread like wildfire. The local news outlets were already buzzing with headlines about the judge versus the royal guard, and social media was ablaze with opinions. Some praised Judge Grayson for standing her ground, calling her decision a bold reminder that no one was above the law. Others sided with Alden, accusing her of overstepping and showing bias against someone in uniform. Public sentiment was divided, but one thing was clear: everyone wanted to know what would happen next. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was electric. Spectators packed the gallery, craning their necks for a glimpse of the man at the center of the storm. When Alden arrived, he cut an imposing figure, walking with the measured grace of someone who knew all eyes were on him. Gone was the defiant stance from earlier. Instead, he carried himself with quiet authority, flanked by two advisors dressed in sharp suits. They whispered to each other as they took their seats, occasionally glancing toward the judge's bench. Judge Eleanor Grayson, meanwhile, sat stiffly behind her desk, her expression unreadable. She had spent the night poring over documents, piecing together fragments of information that painted a troubling picture. The more she learned, the more she realized how little she actually knew. Was this case truly about justice, or something darker? Her mind raced with questions, but outwardly she remained composed, gripping her gavel tightly, as if it could anchor her to some semblance of control. When Alden finally stood to address the court, the room fell silent. His voice carried effortlessly, calm and measured, yet laced with conviction. "Your Honor," he began, bowing slightly, a gesture of respect that caught even Grayson off guard. "I regret any disruption caused yesterday. However, I must reiterate that my actions were not intended to undermine this court. Rather, they were meant to uphold the principles I have sworn to protect." He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. "This charge against me is baseless, designed to distract from larger issues that affect not only myself, but also the integrity of institutions we both serve. I ask only for fairness, an opportunity to present my side without prejudice." Grayson listened intently, her initial frustration giving way to curiosity. There was something compelling about Alden's demeanor, a quiet strength that commanded attention without demanding it. Unlike many defendants who came before her, pleading innocence with desperation or anger, Alden seemed almost serene. It was as though he wasn't fighting just for himself, but for something greater, a cause rooted in truth and accountability. The contrast between them couldn't have been starker. Where Grayson exuded stern authority, Alden radiated composure. Where she relied on procedure and order, he appealed to morality and purpose. Yet, despite their differences, there was an unspoken connection forming, a shared understanding that neither of them wanted to see justice compromised. As Alden concluded his statement, the courtroom erupted into murmurs once again. Reporters scribbled furiously in their notebooks, while spectators whispered theories among themselves. For Grayson, however, the noise faded into the background. All she could focus on was the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. She had made a mistake yesterday, perhaps not legally, but certainly morally, and now she faced a choice: double down on her original decision, or acknowledge her error and seek the truth. Her gaze drifted toward Alden, who stood patiently at the defendant's table, awaiting her response. In that moment, she saw not an adversary but a mirror, an image of what she might become if she allowed pride to cloud her judgment. Slowly, deliberately, she reached for her gavel, tapping it lightly against the block to restore silence. "Captain Alden," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty, "we will reconvene shortly. Until then, I expect full cooperation from both sides." It wasn't an apology, not yet, but it was a start. As the crowd dispersed temporarily, the tension in the air remained palpable. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain: this trial was far from ordinary, and its outcome would ripple far beyond the walls of the courthouse. The recess gave Judge Eleanor Grayson time to think, something she desperately needed. She retreated to her chambers, closing the heavy wooden door behind her with a soft click. The room was quiet except for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, each second echoing like a reminder of the gravity of her position. Her mind replayed the events of the past day: the defiant royal guard, the murmurs of corruption, and the growing public scrutiny. For the first time in years, she felt unsure of herself. She sat at her desk, staring at the files spread out before her. Captain Marcus Alden's words lingered in her thoughts. He hadn't been angry or bitter when he returned. Instead, he had spoken with calm dignity, almost as if he understood her predicament. That realization struck her deeply. Alden wasn't just a defendant. He was someone who believed in justice as fiercely as she did, perhaps even more so. And yet, she had treated him like an adversary from the start. Her assistant knocked gently and entered, carrying a fresh cup of tea. "Your Honor," she said softly, placing the cup on the desk. "Are you all right?" Grayson sighed, rubbing her temples. "I don't know," she admitted, something she rarely did aloud. "I feel conflicted. What if I made the wrong call? What if this isn't about a traffic ticket at all?" The assistant hesitated, then spoke carefully. "People are watching, Your Honor. Not just the public, but powerful people. If there's truth to what Captain Alden says, if this is about exposing corruption, you could be part of something much bigger than a courtroom case." Her words hung in the air, forcing Grayson to confront the uncomfortable truth. This wasn't just about procedure anymore. It was about fairness, integrity, and doing what was right, even if it meant admitting fault. With a deep breath, she stood and straightened her robe. "Send Captain Alden in," she instructed, "and make sure we're not disturbed." A few minutes later, Alden entered the chamber, his posture respectful but guarded. His advisors remained outside, leaving the two of them alone. The silence between them was heavy, filled with unspoken tension. Finally, Grayson broke it. "Captain Alden," she began, her voice softer than usual, "I owe you an apology." His eyebrows lifted slightly in surprise, but he said nothing, waiting for her to continue. "I acted too hastily yesterday," she admitted, meeting his gaze directly. "I let my frustration get the better of me, and I didn't give you a fair chance to explain yourself. For that, I am sorry." Alden studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor. I appreciate your candor." Grayson exhaled, feeling a small weight lift off her shoulders. "I've reviewed the details of your case," she continued, "and I have to admit, some things don't add up. You're not just any defendant. You're a man with a reputation for upholding justice. Why would someone like you risk contempt of court over a minor charge unless there's more to the story?" Alden leaned forward slightly, his tone earnest. "Because this isn't about me, Your Honor. It's about sending a message to anyone who dares challenge the status quo. My investigation into corruption has rattled certain individuals, and they're using every tool at their disposal to silence me, including this court." Grayson's jaw tightened. She had suspected as much, but hearing it confirmed sent a chill through her. "If what you say is true," she said firmly, "then we can't let them win. Justice must prevail, not just for you, but for everyone who depends on these systems to work fairly." For the first time since the trial began, Alden allowed himself a small smile. "That's why I respect you, Your Honor. Despite everything, you still believe in the system. Even when it falters, you fight to protect it." The compliment caught her off guard, but she nodded solemnly. "Then let's work together to ensure it doesn't falter here. I'll reconvene the court, and we'll handle this properly. From the beginning. No shortcuts, no biases, just the truth." As Alden rose to leave, he extended his hand, a gesture of goodwill. Grayson hesitated only briefly before shaking it, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. In that handshake, something shifted. They were no longer adversaries. They were allies bound by a shared commitment to justice. When Alden stepped back into the hallway, his advisors looked at him expectantly. "Well," one of them asked. He glanced back at the closed door of the judge's chamber, a thoughtful expression on his face. "She's willing to listen," he said simply. "That's more than I expected." Meanwhile, inside her office, Grayson stared at the empty chair where Alden had sat. For the first time in days, she felt hopeful. Whatever happened next, she knew one thing for certain. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be worth it. The courtroom was packed to the brim when Judge Eleanor Grayson called the session back to order. Every seat in the gallery was occupied, and even reporters who rarely covered local cases had shown up, eager to witness what promised to be a dramatic showdown. The air buzzed with anticipation as Judge Grayson took her place at the bench, her expression calm but resolute. She tapped her gavel once, silencing the murmurs that filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice steady and commanding. "We are reconvening this case not only to address the charges against Captain Marcus Grayson, but also to ensure that justice is served without bias or prejudice." Her words carried weight, and the audience leaned forward, hanging on every syllable. When it came time for the prosecution to present its case, they faltered almost immediately. Their evidence, a grainy traffic camera photo and a hastily written police report, was weak at best. The prosecutor stumbled through his arguments, clearly unprepared for the scrutiny he was now under. Spectators exchanged skeptical glances, and Judge Grayson's sharp gaze didn't miss a thing. Then it was Captain Alden's turn to speak. He rose from his seat, his movements deliberate and measured. Without hesitation, he stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding attention. For a moment, he simply stood there, letting the silence settle over the room before he began. "Your Honor, esteemed members of the court," Alden said, his voice clear and unwavering, "the charge against me, a minor traffic violation, is not merely an isolated incident. It is part of a larger pattern of harassment aimed at discrediting my efforts to expose corruption within our institutions." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. Then he launched into a methodical dismantling of the prosecution's case. With precision, he pointed out inconsistencies in the police report, questioned the reliability of the traffic camera footage, and highlighted how the timing of the alleged offense coincided suspiciously with his investigation into judicial misconduct. Each argument was delivered like a carefully placed chess move, leaving the prosecution scrambling to respond. But Alden didn't stop there. He went on to explain the broader context of his work, detailing instances where powerful figures had attempted to obstruct his investigations. He cited specific examples, naming names and referencing documents that painted a damning picture of systemic wrongdoing. His delivery was so compelling that even the most skeptical members of the gallery found themselves nodding along. Throughout his presentation, Judge Grayson watched intently, her pen moving rapidly across her notepad as she jotted down key points. She couldn't help but admire Alden's composure and intellect. Here was a man who understood the law inside and out, using it as both shield and sword. It was impossible not to respect his dedication to uncovering the truth. As Alden concluded his remarks, the courtroom erupted into murmurs once again. Reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture every detail, while spectators whispered among themselves about the implications of what they'd just heard. Even the prosecution team seemed deflated, their earlier confidence replaced by unease. Judge Grayson raised her hand, restoring silence with ease. "Thank you, Captain Alden," she said, her tone neutral but tinged with admiration. Turning to the prosecutor, she added, "Does the prosecution wish to rebut?" The prosecutor hesitated, clearly aware that any response would pale in comparison to Alden's performance. After a long pause, he shook his head. "No further questions, Your Honor." Grayson nodded, then addressed the court. "We will take a short recess to review the facts presented thus far. Court will reconvene in 1 hour." As the gallery emptied, the energy in the room remained electric. People gathered in clusters, debating whether this trial marked the beginning of something monumental, a reckoning for those who abused their power. Meanwhile, Alden returned to his seat, his advisors leaning in to congratulate him quietly. Despite the gravity of the situation, there was a flicker of satisfaction in his eyes. He knew he had made his case, not just for himself, but for everyone counting on him to shine a light in the shadows. Back in her chambers, Judge Grayson stared at her notes, her mind racing. What had started as a simple traffic violation had transformed into a high-stakes battle for accountability. And though the outcome was still uncertain, one thing was clear. Justice demanded nothing less than the whole truth, and she intended to see it through. During the recess, Judge Eleanor Grayson retreated to her chambers, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The prosecution's weak case and Captain Alden's compelling arguments had left her deeply unsettled. Something about this trial felt wrong. Not just the charges themselves, but the forces behind them. She couldn't shake the feeling that powerful people were pulling strings in the shadows, using the court as a weapon to silence someone who dared challenge their corruption. As she reviewed her notes, her assistant knocked softly on the door. "Your Honor," the young woman said hesitantly, "there's something you need to see." In her hands, she held a manila envelope marked with the words "confidential." Grayson frowned. "What is this?" "It arrived anonymously," the assistant replied. "No sender, no explanation. Just instructions to give it directly to you." The judge took the envelope cautiously, her curiosity piqued. Inside, she found a stack of documents, emails, financial records, and internal memos, all pointing to a conspiracy within her own judicial system. Names she recognized stared back at her. Senior officials, influential lawyers, even judges. Some of them were orchestrators, others complicit bystanders. But all were implicated in a web of bribery, coercion, and cover-ups. Worst of all, one document outlined how these individuals had targeted Captain Alden specifically, fabricating the traffic charge to discredit him and derailed his investigation into their misconduct. Grayson's heart sank. She had always believed in the integrity of the law, but now she saw cracks in the foundation she had sworn to uphold. Her stomach churned as she realized the enormity of what was at stake. If word got out that the judiciary itself was corrupt, public trust would shatter. This wasn't just about Alden anymore. It was about preserving justice for everyone. Her assistant shifted uncomfortably. "Should we alert the authorities, Your Honor?" Grayson hesitated, weighing her options. Going public with this information could blow the lid off the conspiracy, but it would also expose her to retaliation. These were dangerous people, capable of destroying careers and lives with ease. Yet staying silent wasn't an option either. Justice demanded action, no matter the cost. With a deep breath, she made her decision. "No," she said firmly. "Not yet. First, I need to finish this trial. Whatever happens next depends on whether we can prove Alden's innocence beyond doubt." When the court reconvened, the atmosphere was tense. Reporters leaned forward in their seats, pens poised, while spectators whispered nervously among themselves. Grayson took her place at the bench, her expression unreadable. She tapped her gavel once, restoring order, then addressed the room. "After reviewing the evidence presented today," she began, her voice steady and authoritative, "I find the prosecution's case insufficient to sustain the charges against Captain Marcus Alden. Furthermore, new information has come to light suggesting these allegations may have been fabricated for malicious purposes." Gasps rippled through the gallery, and cameras flashed wildly as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. Grayson paused, letting the gravity of her words sink in before continuing. "This court will not tolerate abuse of power or attempts to manipulate the legal system for personal gain. All charges against Captain Alden are hereby dismissed." The courtroom erupted into chaos. Supporters cheered, while critics muttered angrily under their breath. Alden stood calmly at the defendant's table, his expression one of quiet triumph. He glanced toward Grayson, offering a subtle nod of gratitude. She met his gaze briefly, silently acknowledging the unspoken alliance they had formed. But Grayson wasn't done. Before dismissing the court, she added, "Let this serve as a reminder that justice is blind, not to the truth, but to rank, privilege, and fear. Anyone who seeks to undermine it will be held accountable, regardless of their position." As the crowd dispersed, Alden approached the bench. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "you've taken a bold step today. But there's still much work to do." She nodded grimly. "I know, and I intend to see it through. But I'll need your help." Alden smiled faintly. "You'll have it. Together, we can bring these people to light." For the first time since the trial began, Grayson felt a glimmer of hope. The road ahead would be fraught with challenges, but she knew one thing for certain. The fight for justice was far from over. and neither was her role in it. The dismissal of charges against Captain Marcus Alden sent shockwaves through the city. News outlets scrambled to cover the story, with headlines declaring it a victory not just for Alden, but for integrity itself. Social media exploded with praise for Judge Eleanor Grayson's bold decision, though criticism from certain corners remained sharp. Some accused her of overstepping her bounds, while others claimed she had caved to pressure from powerful forces. But amidst the noise, one undeniable truth emerged. This trial had exposed cracks in the system that could no longer be ignored. In the days following the verdict, Judge Grayson and Captain Alden began working together behind closed doors. They knew they were treading dangerous ground. Exposing corruption meant challenging people who thrived on secrecy and intimidation. Yet neither was willing to back down. Their alliance, born out of mutual respect and shared purpose, quickly evolved into a partnership driven by determination. Their first step was gathering evidence. Alden brought forth documents he had collected during his investigation, detailing illegal transactions, bribes, and unethical deals involving high-ranking officials. Grayson, meanwhile, used her position to request internal audits of court records, looking for discrepancies or signs of tampering. Together, they pieced together a damning puzzle that painted a clear picture of systemic rot. But as their efforts gained momentum, so did resistance. Anonymous threats began arriving at both Grayson's chambers and Alden's office, cryptic messages warning them to stop digging. One night, Alden discovered his car vandalized. The words "back off" scratched into the hood. Grayson received a bouquet of flowers at her home, accompanied by a card that read, "Even judges can fall." Despite the intimidation, neither wavered. Instead, they doubled down, knowing that backing away now would only embolden those responsible. They agreed to take their findings directly to the highest authority, the monarch herself. It was a risky move. If the royal family chose to protect its own, Grayson and Alden risked losing everything. But they had no choice. The stakes were too high to stay silent. When they finally secured an audience with Queen Helena, the tension in the room was palpable. The Queen listened intently as Alden laid out the evidence, his tone respectful yet unyielding. Grayson followed, explaining how the conspiracy reached deep into the judiciary and threatened the very foundation of trust in the legal system. For a long moment after their presentation, the Queen said nothing, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "You've shown great courage bringing this to me," she said, her voice measured. "And I commend your dedication to justice. Rest assured, action will be taken." True to her word, the Queen ordered an independent inquiry led by trusted advisors outside the usual circles of influence. Within weeks, arrests were made. Senior officials, prominent lawyers, even a few judges found themselves facing charges of corruption. Public outrage turned into cautious optimism as reforms were announced to strengthen transparency and accountability across all branches of government. For Judge Grayson, the experience reshaped her understanding of justice. She realized that fairness wasn't just about enforcing laws. It was about protecting the spirit behind them. Her reputation soared, earning her widespread admiration as a champion of reform. Meanwhile, Captain Alden returned to his duties with renewed vigor, hailed as a hero for standing up to tyranny. Yet perhaps the most profound change came in their relationship. What started as a clash of egos had transformed into a bond forged in adversity. As they walked out of the courthouse together after the final hearing, Alden glanced at Grayson and smiled. "We make quite the team, don't we?" She chuckled softly, nodding. "Indeed. Let's hope we never have to do something like this again." Though they both knew the fight for justice was never truly over, they also understood that standing together made anything possible, even taking on giants. Months after the trial and subsequent exposure of corruption, the city had begun to heal, but scars remained. The arrests and reforms sparked by Judge Eleanor Grayson and Captain Marcus Alden's efforts had sent shockwaves through every level of society. Some praised the changes as long overdue. Others grumbled about overreach and disruption. Yet one thing was undeniable. Trust in institutions had started to rebuild, brick by painstaking brick. For Judge Grayson, life in the courtroom returned to its usual rhythm, though she carried herself differently now. Her decisions were still firm, her demeanor unshakable, but there was a new warmth beneath her stern exterior, a recognition that justice wasn't just about rules but also compassion. She often found herself reflecting on how far she'd come since that fateful day when she dismissed Alden without hearing him out. It was a humbling reminder that even judges could learn and grow. As for Alden, his role as both a royal guard and legal advisor expanded. He became a public figure, not because he sought fame, but because people looked to him as a symbol of integrity. His lectures on constitutional law drew larger crowds than ever before, with audiences eager to hear his thoughts on accountability and reform. Despite his growing prominence, he remained grounded, always emphasizing teamwork over individual glory. Their unlikely partnership continued to evolve into something deeper, an alliance rooted in shared values and mutual respect. They began collaborating on initiatives aimed at preventing future abuses of power. Together, they drafted policies requiring greater transparency in judicial proceedings and advocated for independent oversight committees to monitor government actions. Their combined influence made these ideas impossible to ignore, and slowly but surely, real change began to take root. One evening, months after their initial victory, they met at a quiet cafe near the courthouse. Neither wore uniforms or robes, just simple clothes that allowed them to blend in with the crowd. Over cups of coffee, they discussed progress, setbacks, and what lay ahead. "You know," Alden said thoughtfully, stirring his drink, "if someone had told me a year ago I'd be working alongside a judge, I'd have laughed." Grayson smirked, raising an eyebrow. "And if someone had told me I'd let a royal guard lecture me on fairness, I'd have called them crazy." They shared a laugh, the kind born of shared struggle and triumph. For a moment, the weight of their responsibilities lifted, leaving only two people who had learned to trust each other despite their differences. Alden grew serious again. "We've accomplished a lot, but this fight isn't over. There will always be those who try to exploit the system for personal gain. We can't afford to stop now." "I agree," Grayson replied firmly. "But we're stronger together. Whether it's fighting corruption or protecting the innocent, we'll face it head-on, as allies." The conversation turned lighter, drifting toward personal topics. Alden spoke of his family, particularly his young niece, who idolized him and dreamed of becoming a lawyer someday. Grayson shared stories of her own childhood, including how her father's love for books had inspired her passion for law. These small glimpses into their lives deepened their connection, transforming professional respect into genuine friendship. By the time they left the cafe, night had fallen, casting the city in a soft glow. As they walked side by side down the cobblestone streets, neither felt the need to fill the silence. They understood that their journey was far from finished, but they also knew they weren't alone. In the weeks and months that followed, their collaboration extended beyond policy work. They co-founded a mentorship program for aspiring lawyers and law enforcement officers, teaching the next generation about ethics, accountability, and courage. Students flocked to their sessions, hungry for guidance from two figures who embodied the principles they preached. Looking back, neither Grayson nor Alden could pinpoint exactly when their adversarial relationship had shifted into something more profound. Perhaps it happened during the trial, when they first recognized their shared commitment to truth. Or maybe it was later, when they stood shoulder to shoulder against powerful enemies. Whatever the moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the bond they had forged, a bond that proved even those who start as adversaries can become partners in the pursuit of justice. As they parted ways that evening, Alden turned back briefly and called out, "Until next time, Your Honor." Grayson smiled, tipping her head slightly. "Until then, Captain." And with that, they went their separate ways, ready to face whatever challenges awaited them, together.